about to throw you under the bus. You ready to start this episode?
She gonna cut this out, but Lex ain't shit.
I'm gonna leave it if you need to be left. If people need to know that she's getting thrown under the bus for a reason, I wouldn't do it for no reason. Good morning, guys. Good afternoon.
Good evening. How you doing?
Welcome to Carlie's Couch. Thanks for joining us here, where you'll never know.
Dun, 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 dun.
If you're watching the video, you can see we're not in the usual spot. We found another clubhouse to try out. So we're going to get some fresh air today with you as we talk about a very interesting topic, I think. But first, Carlie, if you don't mind, we finally got a review. Thank you. And I shouldn't say finally because you guys was going hard at the beginning. Maybe you're not sharing it, and that's why we don't have new reviews. But we appreciate this one, so we'll go ahead and read it for you guys.
Absolutely. So Say Yum says, favorite podcast by far. I love this podcast. After each episode, I find myself inspired to dig deep and do the self-work and manual work necessary to reach my goals. Y'all are truly motivating. I love the way that you not only give advice, but kind of give steps to get there. I have added listening to your podcast on my Monday morning routine, shout out to that, and it helps make for a more productive week in reaching my goals. Thank you for consistently providing great content. Aw, thank you. Shout out to Say Yum for listening and adding us to your morning routine. I kind of feel honored.
Yeah, thank you. Especially during this time when everybody's routine is whatever.
So, we just trying to make it.
It's nice that you still have one. Shout out to you.
We gonna make it.
You left that a little while ago though, so hopefully you still doing good.
Still hanging in here with us on Mondays.
Still learning from the podcast. And we do have. I wonder if we have 200 now. If not, we were close to it.
200.
Oh, we do.
Yeah.
On YouTube, we got a clean 200 followers there. So we appreciate you guys who listen and watch it. And also listen to it on Apple because they will rank you and give us points, etc. as well. So we're glad that you guys are still enjoying it. So we're still here. We're going to keep on going, I guess.
Yeah, we out here. And I'm excited. It's our first outdoor episode in the clubhouse.
Is it?
Our first outdoor episode?
Oh,
yeah.
I guess so. Okay. I feel like we've been talking about it forever and we just never set it up.
But we,
because we didn't have our own equipment. So it's a lot easier to move around now. Okay. That being said, if anybody wants to hire us to watch us podcast in their space, let us know.
We're down for that. I also like snacks. So food and snacks. But to get to today's
trying
topic,
to get something extra out of the deal.
I mean, I just like snacks. Gosh, I'll bring some too. We can share. But like,
why you getting defensive?
Speaking of defensiveness, that is actually what we're talking about
cackling
today.
Like, ah, dang it. You got me. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have started the episode roasty because now I can't stop.
Man, Lex has been trying to throw me under the bus, y'all. But anyways, we'll get there. So defensiveness, what is defensiveness? You just said that. What is it?
So we're talking about defensiveness today, guys. I would say when a person is being defensive, they are guarding themselves. They are protecting themselves in whatever they say or do. So in that moment, I feel like it's a protection mechanism.
Absolutely. I think it was one of those psychology journals was saying it's a defense or coping mechanism. It is the body and mind's way of keeping you comfortable and safe. And they say it often arises out of childhood in the way that we deal with things as we're growing up. And so it just becomes a coping mechanism.
To cope with what? Criticism?
To cope with criticism, to cope with things that make you feel like you might be being attacked or make you feel like somebody's like questioning you, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. And when you're defensive in your response to something, does it have to be a response? Maybe. It has to be a response, I think, because it's how you react to knowledge that you perceive as being about you or towards you. So it's a reaction. And I think that it's you needing to feel or needing other people to understand your point of view. So if you feel like you have to explain yourself, it's kind of another thing. Like, what does this look like? Explaining yourself, kind of having to tell, why they're wrong or why you did something that you might have got accused of. And it's about making sure you get your point of view across. That's what it is when you're being defensive. You want to make sure, this is what it is, or this is what I think, and wanting that other person to know that. So is that wrong? Is being defensive wrong?
I don't think that it's wrong. It's a defense mechanism, and I can't tell someone how they're coping with something is incorrectly, but I would say it's probably not productive. It's probably not the best way to learn or have a conversation.
That's
if you're
a great
not
way
open.
to say it, I think. It's not progressive. And that's one of the biggest things I think I learned about defensiveness. Jesus Christ, what's the word? About
Defensiveness?
being defensive is how I'm going to have to say it to get it right. Is that whatever you just said, because I just lost my train of thought.
It keeps you closed off and rigid, like unable to be progressive or to have a productive conversation.
Yeah. I think when I recognized that and that clicked for me, then all of a sudden I hated when I could see other people being defensive. And I say it that way just because it's easier to see it from other people than yourself. But I realized, like, man, this is a waste of time because it's not furthering the combo. It's not furthering whatever's going on at hand. It's like you're stopping to be like, but this. And it's like, no, but that's not going towards the solution, really.
Exactly. And I think another thing that it can arise from is like people's insecurities. Like the country saying is a hit dog or holla. Like even if they're not talking about you, you know that sometimes you tweet something and people get like come out of left field like, well, this and this and this, and you're like, whoa, I don't even know you. Like, what are you talking about? You don't even know what I was talking about. But if they feel like you were talking to them,
then they feel the need to get defensive and say something back to you or explain something. Okay.
Exactly. So apparently a defensive communication expert is a career, which is cool. And Jack Gibbs, who's one in these articles we were reading, outlines like 6 behavioral categories that lead to defensiveness. And
like this is the situation that makes you be defensive. Okay.
Exactly. So dogmatism, being things that are black and white. I'm right, you're wrong. It's either this or that. And other kinds of all or nothing thinking and communication can cause people to react defensively. Like there is
I have a good example of that.
Okay.
So that's like if a Jehovah's Witness knocks on your door and says, well, you're not going to go to heaven. You're not going to be one of the 144,000 if you don't do these things. And I think that immediately would make somebody, and I'm not trying to get on Jehovah's Witnesses. It could be anybody coming to your door basically and saying, well, you're not going to heaven if you don't get baptized, or you're not this if this doesn't happen, or this is the truth and you're going to hell. Let's say that. That's very likely to make somebody get defensive. Like, whoa, buddy, like you just going to hit me with the wham bam. Like it's just your way or no way. So I think that's the first thing I think about with dogmatism. And that's why there's dogmatic doctrine and stuff too, actually, with religion. So that makes sense.
Another one is a lack of accountability. So shifting blame, making excuses, and rationalizing behavior leads people to raise their defense levels with you.
Yeah, that one's an easy one to explain too. I think that's when it's telling somebody, oh, well, you're late, or you still need to turn this thing in, and kind of coming at what they've done or what they should be doing or are supposed to do, whether they were or not. I think that could be an example of something in that space, accountability.
For sure. Another one is controlling or manipulative behavior. Using all sorts of behaviors to control or manipulate people will lead to them being defensive. Like no one likes to feel used. And so if you feel like someone might be using you, or if they have used you in the past, you might be more defensive towards them.
I'm trying to think of an example for that.
For example, if a person always calls you, hey girl, what you got? But not during a pandemic, right? Because we're staying safe. But if a girl, hey girl, what you doing this weekend? Let's go out. And like, she don't have a car, but she always wants you to drive somewhere. But then like, let's say y'all go to the club, and every time y'all go, she's not really like hanging out with you. And she just is using you for your car or to get places.
Oh, so then when she hits me up, I might automatically be like, oh, so you can go like do your thing or whatever. Like,
yeah, or you just trying to use my car? Like, you know what I'm saying? Oh, you just want you. That's the only reason why you call me.
That's being defensive.
Well, if it's, I think so. Like, because it can make you guarded and make you feel like, nah. I think it could lead to it, but that's a very like base level, super like clear cut example, and I don't always think that controlling and manipulation is. Another one is guarded and withholding information. When people feel like they're being left in the dark, purposely excluded from having information that they should know, they are threatened and will react defensively.
What does that look like?
I'm thinking about,
and I guess maybe I need to think about what are defensive reactions, because it's easy for me to think of what the reactions are for some of those early ones.
Yeah, this one, when I started reading it, I automatically thought about my cousins. I'm the baby of like all of them, and I always felt like they were keeping things from me, but it always made me like really like fight back against all the things that they were doing. But then with a more grown up example, like if you're on a team and you feel like part of your team isn't sharing information that you need to do your work, you might be more rigid towards them, or be more closed off, or be more argumentative or stuff with them.
Skeptical and all that.
For sure.
Oh, and then definitely this one, superiority is another space where it will make you feel defensive if somebody's speaking to you in a way that you perceive they think they're better than you. And so it immediately makes you think like, whoa, like, well, maybe the way I want to do it is probably the better way, or a different way than what you're saying, or something like that. I can see that one pretty easily.
And then the last one on here of these 6 is a constant focus on catching somebody doing something wrong rather than right. Oh my God, absolutely. Yeah. Someone is always commenting on everything that's wrong, but never gives you any positive feedback or any like tries to build you up. You're going to automatically be defensive, like even if they don't intentionally mean it like that. For example, like if someone's mom is like, wow, like your hair look like, is always commenting negatively about your appearance. Like,
but I think that's one of the, probably a bigger reason in people, the way they grew up, of why they become defensive, because they're a critical environment a lot of times of parents, and you know, it's one of the things about criticism that can help you curb it, or being defensive and curbing it with criticism, is recognizing that, you know, really this person probably wants the best for you, or they believe in you or love you and they want to see, you know, things be better or your hair look better than that. But I think, you know, when it comes to like parents, caregivers, people that, you know, that you grew up with, your church, you have relationships, people that you want to know you're special to, and you want to feel good, like you're doing right by them, it hits you a little different when they're being critical. And I think that causes you to really always like try to do better and be defensive and be hard on yourself because of that. So those criticisms, I think, are probably what most likely shape us.
Yeah, and I was about to say, that's probably the easiest one out of this whole list for me to be like, oh, absolutely. I have a million examples of that. So now that we talked about kind of what defensiveness is and also where it comes from, what does it look like? Like, how do you know when you're being defensive?
I know when I'm being defensive as soon as I try to explain my point of view, essentially. And sometimes it is about me, like if I'm late. So if somebody's like, oh, well, it's 3:35 and I'm supposed to be there at 3:15, and I say, oh, well, you know, there's traffic, or, you know, this happened, that happened, instead of being able to just be like, you know, it won't happen again, or yeah, I am a little late, you know, like just move the convo forward. And to me, that person saying that also is not progressive in anything. And I catch myself thinking that too. Like if somebody pulls up late and, you know how you kind of feel some kind of way a little bit, but it's like, for what? But you don't have to say that either. I think saying that is already like not progressive, because like, all right, like what does that change? You know, I'm here now. Unless it's a problem that you need to really talk about. And maybe they're coming at you with it like that. But I think it looks like that when I start to explain immediately why this thing happened. Like, it's not my fault either, and I'm kind of putting it on other factors.
Absolutely. I am being defensive, and I notice it in myself. Like much like Alexia said, when I start trying to explain myself, but also over-explain myself, or I start trying to clarify my intentions in situations that don't mitigate that type of conversation. Like if we're not having this conversation about growth, I don't need to tell you like why I feel like this and how this led to this and this led to this. And when I notice I start doing that, I'm like, oh, I'm probably being defensive or making excuses. I feel like mine is more evident in me over-explaining or over-clarifying or trying to get you to see something, like trying to get you to understand and come to my side on a situation.
And a lot of times nobody even asked you that. And it's like you're kind of doing that for yourself because you're anti-you. And one example I thought of as you were talking was an email. Sometimes you've ever write an email and then you go back like, I ain't need to really say, well, I just did this part. Like I could just cut that out and be like, here's what we did. You know what I mean? Like you kind of trying to explain it a little bit more because you feel like it's not up to par or whatever. But it's like nobody's even really accusing you of that. You're kind of, that's the you being hard on yourself part. And so we can almost kind of cause our own stress, I think, by how we're kind of like assuming this space is going to be in that way. And then we're already coming in defensive.
Absolutely. And I think touching on like the insecurities and us projecting a little bit sometimes in conversations. Like, let's say someone was overcritical of your body, and then one day someone makes a comment that's not necessarily about that, but you take it way left field because you're just so used to people doing that. And I feel like that's why it's important to understand how we respond to these things, because it's important to address that, and it can impact a lot of situations in your life really negatively.
Is there anything else? I think that kind of covers it. I think in some kind of way you're explaining yourself or over explaining.
Or feeling attacked. Like if you felt like somebody's attacking you and it's not really that deep, like that's probably a good indication of, like, for example, if you walk into a meeting and someone's like, it's 3:35 and you fly off the handle.
Yeah, that's you being defensive. And I mean, I guess you can argue if you should or shouldn't. I mean, we're saying you shouldn't. Like, life will be easier if you're not. But, I mean, I think that's a cause and reaction. And I think it's one of those things where it's important to recognize being defensive because you are giving your power away to these other things in that moment. And it's usually we've already said it's a reaction, but it's also usually like an impulsive thing because that's just how you've been set. And so to really be aware of it and change that, what do you think it changes in you to be less defensive? Like, why is it good for you to be less defensive?
I think it's good, one, because it brings you to another level of self-awareness. So you're more aware of your triggers, of your insecurities, of what's going on in your life. But I also think it gives you the opportunity to have less strife and less stress with things if you are not always so caught up in feeling like you have to prove yourself to people or tell them these things and over explain. You kind of just let the water roll off your back like a duck lets water roll off their backs. You're like, oh, okay. Like in your head, you're like, yeah, that was a little snippy, but I'm not about to waste all my energy and my time. I'm going to own my power in this moment and just choose to keep it moving.
It also helps you to actually become a better person. Because you're actually listening and can take a criticism, which is really what it is. It's your reaction to being criticized. And I have an example that I don't know why stick with me so much because like my feelings was just so hurt, but it's not that deep. But my feelings were just so hurt, and I really saw this over and over and learned from the situation to where I can catch myself much better. But when I was doing, working with Bronzeville, the audio series, look it up on iTunes. It's really good. Season 2 has been postponed due to everything going on. But we were working on filming. They were filming them in the studios doing the voice acting for Bronzeville Season 2. And my friend Celeste, shout out Celeste, she's the photographer while they're in their sessions, while the voice actors are at their mics, kind of how we are, and they're performing in there, right? And the camera clicks and makes that clicking noise. And so, while they are playing around or just getting the voice acting together, she's like, click, 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 you could take pictures then. And then they'll say, okay, we're really rolling right now, action, everybody quiet, whatever. And then she would just kind of be in there chilling, and they would actually perform it without her, moving around or taking pictures. And so one day she wasn't there, she was somewhere else. And so I had to take pictures in her stead. And so I'm in there like, click, 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 like taking pictures of everybody. And it's like, what's his name? Why is my face blanking? Oh, Lawrence Fishburne. So, and he's like mad stern, y'all. He's really like intimidating as hell in real life. So it's like Lawrence Fishburne, Lorenz Tate and them in there too. And so I'm in here like click, click, click. And then, they're talking and I'm like still like click, click. And then Fishburne looks at me. He's like, hey, we're not taking any photos while we're doing, while we're really rolling. And I said, and I remember I put my phone down. I was like, oh, are we rolling right now? I thought we were. And then I could tell, like, the way Lorenz looked at me, he just looked at me like, don't say nothing else. And I was like, oh, you got it. And, like, I realized, like, in that moment, I wanted to say, like, oh, I didn't hear that you said you were rolling. I didn't hear that we were going. I didn't realize, like, I'm sorry, but none of that matters. Like, it's just like, oops, sorry about that. And, like, stop and pay attention and do it. And I just remember the way he looked at me like so stern, because in the previous year we were working on other Bronzeville stuff before. And I was working very closely with the Tates, and we were in Chicago and they were doing like their press run or whatever. And I guess I would do this frequently to where, he would very often give me advice, which I've now come to really appreciate and take. Like he, you know, because y'all know I be looking mean and I don't mean to, but, you know, like, hey, you know, when we're doing this, make sure you really, you know, some of the other people can get kind of threatened if you come across too, you know, like sit back or whatever, you know, smile, be extra sometimes, just, you know, to play the game, which is like, all right, cool, whatever. So he would always kind of give me that type of advice. And I guess he just, one time he hit me and was like, hey, you know, you don't have to explain, you know, every time I say something, you have something that you say to tell me why you did it this way or why you didn't realize or whatever. And it's like, just take the advice, you know, just take the advice. And he would say that to me over and over till I really realized, like, I would get annoyed now when I would start to do that and catch myself do it. And so then a year later, when we're in the room with Fishburne, and then like the way he looked at me and I was like, oh, dang it. Like, I'm still doing it. But like, it's just the way he was giving me so much tips and advice that I now realize, and at the time I kind of realized was helping me. But like, every time somebody gives me advice, like, I just realized, like, I wanted to be like, okay, well, you know, I thought this, or I do it this way. And since then, it just really stuck to me. And since then, I've really come to dislike, even when people on my own team do that. And I kind of recognize that in people who like to talk and talk and talk a lot, but whether they think they don't or they don't carry out as much, or they're not as good as following up as they are with the talking part. And so it makes me realize that about myself. And also, like, when I've hired people and talked to them, I'm like, oh man, she reminds me of me. And then we'll be in meetings and stuff, and I'm like, all right, do you have this part? Oh, well, you know, I started it, but then I wasn't sure if you wanted this. Do you think that we should da-da-da? And you kind of try to spin it into something, like, and I'm like, damn, that's how it's like, how I be sounding, like, trying to kind of BS through, like, you know, what you were supposed to do. And I'm like, oh man, I hear it now. And other people, when they're kind of trying to get defensive and then divert, and how much time that really wastes, because now you're trying to spin into other stuff. And I'm like, all right, girl, like, let's go back, because I just need to know, do we have this? If we don't, that's fine. Let's just move on. But like, we don't have to keep like spinning around with it. And so I see it a lot more, and I'm very much more aware of it, because shout out Lorenz, he made me aware of it. And I felt miserable every time he called me out too, because I didn't realize how reactive and how impulsive it comes out. So that's like my whole big spiel about, ever since then, like maybe a few years ago, like I really, really recognize it when I see it.
No, I love that, and thank you for sharing that. That's such a good example. How has that helped with your, like, with anything in your life? Like, if you notice such a pivotal moment when you're working on, you know, not being defensive and on just listening and just keeping flowing and moving through things, like, how has that helped with anything, or has it helped?
It cuts like that, just yapping and back and forth, and it shows that you actually want to learn. It is you actually wanting to learn. If somebody says something to me and I'm like, oh, okay, cool, like, thank you, and even that, like, actually saying thank you, thank you, I'll take that in. And I did even get to a point with him where I was like, all right, you know, keep telling me stuff, like, if there's anything else, because, you know, I think after a while he probably saw I was like, all right, man, because I was with him the whole day, and I was doing something that is not even my space. Like, I was like their press person for the day or whatever. And so they knew that it was a learning experience for me, and they were trying to make it that. But I think that it allows me to give myself the space to actually get better, like listen to what somebody's saying and get better. Another thing people call me out on all the time is cutting people off when they're talking, because I'm so like ready to, like, girl, get to the point. Like, I don't even really want to listen to all this, or I just want, what's the solutions? Or if I feel like in my mind, I know what you're about to get to. So I'm like, all right, get to that. So they'll be telling the story, and I'm like, yeah, like when he did this, like, just to try to get to it. And it's like, no, just let them talk and, like, you know, tell the story. But people always like, can you let me talk? Or can you stop cutting me off? Or you cut me off again? I'm like, ugh, like, I'll just get mad because I'm doing it. But I'm like, all right, you're right. And I think it just helps me to be more aware, because I can use those things to learn more about myself.
No, that's really dope. And that you took it like that, because you could just still be mad defensive, like, nah, I was just, you know, trying to just cut down. No, but then that's a whole bunch of talking.
Yeah. You can't get better. Being defensive, you cannot get better. And I think that that's like one of the biggest things. It's like, when you're being criticized in particular ways, like taking it in that way. But sometimes it isn't you though. Sometimes people are being critical of you, or you know when something's going on with somebody else, and they just kind of have an attitude or whatever it may be, in which case it's also like, okay, even easier to just be like, all right, like, you got it, and not feel defensive about it.
Exactly. You can't own other people's things, but when you are being defensive, when it might not be, when someone's not just projecting on you, whenever they might actually be trying to help or give advice, or, life is teaching you lessons. Like, I feel in my relationships, when I notice that I've stopped being as defensive, we're able to have more clear communication. There's a lot more space for me to grow and to be open to what things are, instead of like trying to get them to be where I want to be. And I feel like that's part of defensiveness too, is you're trying to push that narrative and trying to get people to see or understand or be the way that you want them to, or whatever. And
so it also helps you to also actually learn more about other people by you not being defensive and understanding like what their actual point of view is, or what they are saying, or what they want or don't want, instead of you thinking that like what they should be doing.
Yeah.
And it's better for your relationships in general too, because another thing we haven't talked about as much with defensiveness is a lot of times like in relationships, if why do you always leave the dishes on the sink, or those types of things. There's lots of different things like that with relationships and people, whether you live with them or romantic relationships or whatever, and those things tend to kind of build up to where you just feel like whether you're walking on eggshells all the time, or like you feel like you're defensive because now it's like, well, you always leave your hair stuff on in the bathroom, and that doesn't progress anything either. And so even with another person getting defensive, right, it might feel like you're getting attacked, but you still have to be able to step outside of that to want to have a common ground that we get to, or that we have an understanding of, like what's the real issues, and hopefully like y'all both want to see each other happy or content in this space that y'all share. And so from that, you still have to give validity to like the person's feelings, and it's not just a matter of like reacting or not and just walking away. Like you still have to dive into that sometimes.
You talk a lot about defenselessness, and I think it was the 7 spiritual laws
being
of
defensive.
Success. You think? No, in the book, the 7 spiritual laws of success, isn't defenselessness one of them?
That's part of the law of least effort, in which you shouldn't have to be forcing anything. And so I believe, let me make sure I get it kind of correct. If you practice being defenseless, you're open to things happening and however it needs to happen. And you're not just stuck in your way of thinking that, well, this or that. Like if you're always explaining or trying to figure things, make them make sense for you, that you're not letting things happen the way they could naturally just be happening. It's very rigid.
I like that a lot.
And so I think that was the main piece about that, to where he says like, practice defenselessness in order to just let things kind of happen without trying to explain your way.
And so I think that's super important. And I talk about flow a lot. We had a whole episode about flow, actually. If you haven't listened to it, go back. It's a few back. So what are some ways that we can practice to be less defensive?
One way you can be less defensive is by having a clear idea of where your values are rooted, strong rooted values. And by that, I mean like what somebody says can like take you off, of what is right. Sometimes people are incorrect when they're kind of coming at you around something. So like I said, sometimes, my bad, I was late. Sometimes they're coming at you wrong and trying to tell you what you care about or what you did or what you think. And yeah, you want to be defensive because that's not true. But if you are strong and know, like, that's not right, but you don't have to sit here and go back and forth about it or let that bother you, because you know who you are.
I love that. And I know I say that a lot. Every time I listen back to the podcast, I'm like,
no, you just said it because I was making fun of you.
Oh, man.
See, she got defensive and she did it to
herself.
herself.
No, I really do say it a lot, though. I notice on a podcast, because when you listen back to yourself, it's always still weird hearing my voice, even though we have how many episodes? 90 plus? It's always interesting. Noticing that being defensive is impulsive. And so slow down. Take a pause, like catch yourself before you automatically like say something back. Before that snapback come back, just stop.
Especially via text. That's a good way to practice, because that's how I had to kind of start practicing is like if you're talking to somebody and they hit you with something like, oh, you always da-da-da, or you never do this or that. And also catch yourself being that person too, because a lot of times it's that. And now I understand why people get so defensive, because like say things better first of all, and not so definitive with the always never. Like that's clear ways to lose an argument. But yeah, like in text too, you can especially, like, you know, those things where it's like they show what you're texting and you delete it and you go back and put something else. So catch yourself for sure there. And then in person, it may be a little more difficult, but you can catch it too.
Mm-hmm. Acknowledging what was said, and that upsets you or didn't, like just acknowledging it. Do you want to expand on that?
I would also say that has to do with, like, if somebody has a concern with you, like, acknowledge their concern, or, you know, like, oh, you always leave the dishes out. And it's like, well, I like doing it, you know, putting them all in once the sink's full, or, you know, whatever it is. But, you know, acknowledging, like, oh, okay, yeah, there are dishes here. And so it's not like you're trying to make them feel like they're crazy for what they're saying, whether you think that their argument is valid or not. Mm-hmm. Another thing is accepting responsibility, which kind of goes into my story earlier, and just recognizing that, okay, when people say things to you, it can be to help you. It can be to help you get better, and to accept that responsibility for what you're doing or not doing.
Another one is to detach. And this is kind of expanding on the slowing down. So like, instead of shooting that comeback, like ask a question, like thinking about how you can be different in a situation. So instead of like listening with your reply in mind, just try to listen. Instead of like freezing up, like maybe you have a conversation. Instead of like flying off the handle at somebody, maybe you go take a walk and then come back.
Being that person that they're that's getting criticized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in the event that you would be defensive, whatever your normal defense mechanism is.
Some people hate that though.
Well, yeah, and I'm not saying like, nah, we ain't gonna do this, I'm gonna come. No, but just thinking about like for personal growth, if I'm the person that always has to say something back, how about I just try not to say something back one time and just see what that feels like? Yeah,
and a lot of times it's weird because people don't know how to react. Or I've seen that before too, where it's like you're kind of starting something and they actually say like, okay, you're right. And then it's like, damn, I don't know, like, and then what else? You know what I mean? Like sometimes have you noticed, or maybe I noticed with myself, that you think you want an agreement or you want something, but then you get it and you're like, okay, and you almost look for something else. Like you really just kind of are comfortable with a little bit of tension sometimes in particular relationships, more than you actually want to see this person be, you know, this perfect person or who you want them to be or whatever it may be.
That's a huge area for self-growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, sometimes you're comfortable there, and so that's why you tend to have like a lot of these types of convos with certain people over others. But yeah, I think that it's important to overall use these things, especially the pause, especially becoming aware of it, because I think you'll just realize how much you're keeping yourself in the same spot in a lot of spaces, because you're not just taking it in, like when people are saying things, you're not just taking it in and actually using it to fuel something else.
Exactly. And just saying okay and you're right, and not feeling the need to over explain yourself about anything. Like, okay.
Yeah, so I would challenge y'all to pick a day and try to pay attention. Like maybe have a piece of paper. Well, I say piece of paper like it's 1998. Use your phone. Open up the notes app. If you don't have
a cell phone.
Write your number down, girl. Damn, use your cell phone. And in the notes app, because I don't know why I didn't say this, because I use it all day for this type of stuff. But just kind of pay attention to when you notice yourself getting defensive, with who or around what people, around what things. A lot of times I feel like it's an ego thing. There's different things, right? In those different situations that are attacked. And sometimes it's your ego. And sometimes it's your morals or your values or like something else. But just paying attention to what that is and how often you probably are doing it. And you might even catch it if it's like low key stuff. Like everything's not as serious, but when you realize how often you need to respond to explain why, how, what, I think that's like, oh man, I didn't realize I do this that much.
Yeah, I literally caught myself the other day. Like someone had said something that I found kind of snippy, and I was like typing a response. I look like Kermit on the little GIF where he's like doing this, but I was on my phone, so I was like click, 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 click. And I was just like, nah, but you already know that I would. And I was just like, nope, you're just not gonna do this right now. And I just like put my phone down, and I feel so much better. And I was like, why do I feel this need to justify myself right now? There's not. Let it go. Try that. I would love to hear where you felt that you were being most offensive, or maybe one way you tried to like change that, or, you know, just about your journey with this. Is something that we're all going through, especially me. Let me not speak for everybody. Something I'm going through, and I'm working on being, you know, less defensive so I can keep growing and keep learning and being open to go with the flow.
I love it. Let us know if you have any other thoughts about defenselessness, being defensive, and hit us up on the site, on YouTube comments, on Instagram, Twitter, everywhere we are.
Mm-hmm. And this week we have a shout out. Myavana Hair Care uses AI technology to recommend the perfect products for your unique hair type and texture. Founded by Candace Harris, is Black woman owned. She's originally out of Atlanta, but I believe she's LA based now. So
can you spell it out? Like, is that the name of an app?
It's
or is it something on your computer?
A website and an Instagram. I'm not quite sure, but Myavana, Myavana Hair Care, and their Instagram is just Myavana Hair Care.
So they create their own products.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, cool. Okay. So they're recommending which of their products to you?
Yeah,
not all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Got you. And this week we have a question that is,
dun, 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 dun.
How do you want to change the world?
It's my question, so I probably should have had an answer for this.
I can't answer if you need.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So I would say, how do I want to change the world? I want to change the world by facilitating / encouraging more Black creatives to create what they want to see and don't see. And that's what we're doing with our agency. That's why I try to reflect on all of our work, and collaboration is a big part of that. And so I want to always have people and give them exposure and space to create with us in that way.
I love it.
So we can see more of ourselves, or more stories and multifaceted things in media.
Absolutely. And that's something that's way long overdue. So I'm excited for all the work that y'all are doing and have been doing and will do. For me, I want to empower people to create a life that they love. All people, but specifically Black people, brown people, people of color. And the work that I do is, with corporations to help teach teachers, to help teach nonprofits, to help teach in the corporate space, but also with kids, like actually hands-on, giving them access to a toolkit of social and emotional learning, mindfulness, self-love that helps them attack whatever situation is going on in their lives, so they can, build this life that they love while seeing themselves represented in media and all of that.
I say, don't touch me.
I wasn't trying to touch you.
That was like my immediate response. Oh, yeah, don't touch me. I'm sorry. That threw me off. She actually barely brushed upon me.
Accidentally. My nail grazed.
But no, I love that. And how fortunate that we get to change the world every day in what we like doing and what we get paid to do, barely. So I think that's a good alignment there, that how you want to change the world does fit into your daily practices, weekly practices, whatever it is that you're doing with your time.
So how do you want to change the world? At Carlie's Couch Instagram. Hit us up on stories. Let us know. Message us. Follow us. Leave us a 5-star review if you haven't, and one to type out so we can read one.
Go. Who's next? Who's next? Come on, guys. Hop on Apple Podcasts now. Leave us 5 stars.
Let's see it.
Make hip hop Harry proud. Look, if for every no, let me not say that. I was about to say we gotta do something for every review, but I'm not doing nothing. I'm gonna say thank you. I'm gonna hop on this table and dance next week. Okay,
we're gonna get 50 reviews now. Why?
I hope so, but we'll see. Thank you all for joining us. We appreciate y'all being part of this conversation, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, y'all.